Will the Detroit Lions trade their first round pick this offseason? That is the question that every Detroit Lions fan and every piece of the media has been asking since Myles Garrett officially requested a trade just over a week ago. But a Myles Garrett trade is far from the only thing the Detroit Lions can do this year. They can trade up in the draft, they could trade back in the draft, they could trade for a different player, they could not trade their pick at all. And each and every one of those scenarios has pros and cons to it. And today, those are the situations we're going to take a look at. We're going to weigh the pros and cons, the players that the Lions could get in each and every one of those scenarios. And at the end of the video, we're going to rank them by the best opportunity to the worst opportunity and see what the Detroit Lions should do with their 28th overall pick. So, with that being said, let's take a look at the four options, right? Because really, there's only four things the Lions can do. They can stick at 28, pick a player, and move on with the draft. They can trade up in the draft, they can trade back in the draft, or they can trade their pick for a player. Each and every one of these opportunities comes with its list of pros and cons. It comes with the opportunities and the drawbacks. And today we're going to take a look at it. So before we get into it, let's take a look at the history because Brad Holmes does have one. Through 2021 to 2022, Brad Holmes was pretty consistent at sticking in the top 10, right? He drafted Penei Sewell at 7, drafted Aiden Hutchinson at 2. But as soon as Brad Holmes got the opportunity to pick outside of the first round, or outside of the top 10 in the first round, he decided to make a trade. He traded up for Jameson Williams. He traded back for Jahmyr Gibbs from the top 10, and then again traded up for Terrion Arnold just a year later. He's moved around the NFL draft a ton. He might be one of those NFL GMs that trade around in the draft more than any of the others. And for the most part, it works for the Detroit Lions. They get their players, they get the guys that they really like, and they get the opportunity to add star power to their team, and they've done that. Right? They've added guys like Brian Branch. They've added guys like Sam Laporta, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Derek Barnes, Kirby Joseph, all of these really, really talented players by moving up, by moving back, by trading around, by moving some assets, and they've ended up with a pretty good overall team throughout the years. Now, the first situation we're going to look at today is the simplest one, is arguably the most likely one, and the one that Brad Holmes could potentially just end up sticking with, and that being you just stay at 28. You pick a player like Mike Green, like Jaheed Campbell, like Kenneth Grant, like Jack Sawyer, players that are really good, are very talented players, guys that will immediately start or immediately play and immediately have a role, but guys that could potentially take a couple of years to develop, guys that might not hit their ceiling till year 2 or year 3, or might just need the right coaching staff to really elevate their play to the next level, but guys nonetheless that are worthy of that 28th pick, that'll be good players, be good talents, and at the end of the day, that's what the Lions want. They don't care about positional value. They don't care about a lot of other factors that a lot of teams tend to look at. They want good football players. They almost always go with the best football player available. And while it leads to some, uproar on draft night of drafting Jahmyr Gibbs at 12, of drafting Jack Campbell at 18, of drafting Sam Laporta at 34, or, any of the other major splashes that Brad Holmes has made throughout the media through the years, almost always, though, it is the right pick. Jahmyr Gibbs was the right pick, right? Jack Campbell was the right pick. He was the best player at that position, or one of the best players at that position. The Lions don't care about, health issues necessarily. They don't care about positional value. They want the best football players. And at 28, there are still going to be some really, really darn good football players. So the pros here, obviously, you don't have to give up any draft assets. The rookie contract will be quite cheap, and you still get quite a good, high-quality player that can impact the team early, but can also still have rooms to grow over the next 4 to 5 seasons. Second opportunity the Lions have is to make a bigger splash, to trade their pick away for a Myles Garrett, for a Trey Hendrickson, for a Max Crosby, for a Micah Parsons, a player that absolutely will make the roster better day one. This is arguably the safest option that the Detroit Lions have because more likely than not, these all-pro caliber players will come to the Detroit Lions, change colors, and still be all-pro caliber players. Now, that's not a guarantee, right? There are lots of trades that happen where a star player goes somewhere and it just doesn't work out, right? That is a risk that you risk happening, but it is safer than drafting a player. It's safer than taking a rookie out of college. It's safer than a lot of the other things you could do with your draft picks. So some of the pros, obviously, being you get a superstar player. I think with the Detroit Lions being in the window that they are, this next season will be their absolute peak best chance to win a Super Bowl. And while the window won't completely slam shut after 2026, I do think it starts to kind of go on the decline, right? Aiden Hutchinson's going to get a new contract. Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, Sam Laporta, Jameer Gibbs, Jack Campbell are all going to start getting new contracts while St. Brown gets expensive, while Jared Goff gets expensive, while Sewell gets expensive. So in 2026, while all of those guys are still on their rookie contracts, before Jared Goff gets big, before Amon-Ra gets big, before Penei gets big, you have an opportunity to add a star player like this that's going to be a bit more expensive and go win a Super Bowl. And I think that is one of the better options the Detroit Lions potentially have. Of course, the cons are Myles Garrett's going to be really freaking expensive, right? Trey Hendrickson's going to be really, really expensive. Max Crosby, Micah Parsons, any player worthy of a first round pick is going to be really expensive. So you potentially shut your Super Bowl window even sooner than it otherwise would have been if you draft one of these guys, but it improves your odds at a Super Bowl tremendously. The next option is the Lions trade up in the draft. They still get the benefit of the rookie contract. They still get the benefit of, getting a player to develop and getting a guy for 4 or 5 seasons, but they also get a better talent. They get a better quality prospect potentially. They move up and they get an already blue chip superstar player that can be elite on day one, as opposed to potentially having to wait for a guy at 28 to find his footing and maybe waiting a couple weeks, maybe waiting a couple months, maybe even waiting a full year before they finally start to be a true star on the field. Now, some of the players in range for this one are, Mason Graham, if he ends up falling roughly to, 10, 11, Shaven Revel from East Carolina. You have Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame. You have a couple other guys that could potentially fall in the draft just due to the abundance at the position or the positional value that we know Lions don't really care about. There are lots of options, but I think this is the worst one. First off, you have to trade up, right? Which means you're going to give up probably your first round pick this year, likely your first round pick next year, and potentially even your first round pick in 2027. And that still might not be enough. You might need to trade seconds and thirds. You might need to trade players to move up for this guy. And despite how safe a prospect may look, there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a slam dunk prospect. There's no such thing as a guaranteed superstar in the league. There's no such thing as a guarantee that a prospect will work out. And that's scary, right? And to give up draft assets, to give up picks and players and all of these different assets to go get that guy, they almost have to work out. Now, that doesn't always happen, right? You had the 49ers trading up for Trey Lance, and it didn't work out for Trey, but it worked out for the Niners, who just happened to get really lucky and draft a quarterback in the same draft in the 7th round, right? It happens, right? You can recover from it, but it's a lot harder to recover when you don't have your 3 first-round picks. It's a lot harder to recover when you only have day 2, day 3 picks on players that need time to develop and need time to find their footing on the field. The last option is that the Detroit Lions do the exact opposite. They trade back into the 2nd round. They trade back into the 3rd round. They go from having 2 picks inside the top 100 to having 3, to having 4. And honestly, I don't think that's a bad option. The Lions need depth players. They need players that can impact on the field, that can rotate, that can, play a fair amount of snaps, but they don't necessarily need superstars. And we'll talk about the roster in a little bit, but they need good quality, high floor players to impact the game. And I think a lot of the draft's value when it comes to trench players, when it comes to guards and D tackles and edge rushers, where the Lions would really be interested, is the 2nd round, is that 25 to 75 range, where you're going to see JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Devon Ezuruku, Kyle Kennard, TJ Sanders, Deion Walker, and so many other quality players, because that's just where they are. That's where D tackles go, is in the 2nd round. That's where great run stopping edge rushers go, is in the 2nd round. And that's not to say that they can't be great, but whereas a guy like Mason Graham might show up and be a top 15 defensive tackle day 1, or as far as even at 28, right, where you might see Mike Green become a really good top 15, top 20 pass rusher day 1. You might see Jaheed Campbell become a great linebacker day 1. JT Tuimoloau is going to come into the league. He's going to be a great edge setter. He's going to, play a really athletic position the way he did at Ohio State. And he might walk away with 7, 8 sacks. He might walk away with 10, 11 TFLs, but he's going to be consistent. He's going to be a high floor player. And at the end of the day, that's pretty appealing to the Detroit Lions. Jack Sawyer's the same way. He might come into the NFL, only get 6, 7 sacks, but you put 6, 7 sacks next to Aiden Hutchinson with Aleem McNeil and DJ Reader on that defensive line, you're pretty happy with 6 or 7 sacks, right? And that goes for Kyle Kennard, that goes for the edge rusher from Boston College, that goes for all of those guys, right? If you have a high floor, if you can defend the run well, if you can get to the quarterback even semi-consistently and take advantage of one-on-one opportunities, you're a fit for what the Detroit Lions want. You are what the Detroit Lions are looking for, and you will find time in the game. So where they may not get a superstar on day one, they may not have an all-pro caliber player in their rookie season like Laporta or, like Penei Sewell was really good right out of college, or even Amon-Ra St. Brown was really good right out of college. You're going to get high-level, super good quality players. And if you can get 3 or 4 of those guys, you might be able to argue that that outweighs the value of a Mason Graham. That might even outweigh the value of a Myles Garrett, right? Myles Garrett is old, right? He's 29. He's going to be 30, 31 at the end of his contract, and then you're going to need to pay him a lot of money. Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, right? Kyle Kennard, they're 21, 22, 23 years old. They're going to be under contract for 5 years for really, really cheap. And if you get, 2 of those guys and they each average 5, 6 sacks a season, yeah, that's going to be less than Myles Garrett. But the impact of 2 good players often outweighs the impact of just a singular guy you can game plan around. So there is some tactics there too. Right? The pros, you get more players, you get more quality, you get more draft picks, they're cheaper contracts, they're longer term guys. But of course, the downside is you might potentially not get the top end guys. You might not get all pros right out of college, and that is a drawback. But even in the second round, we saw Cooper DeJean be a star out of the second round this year. We've seen Brian Branch, Sam Laporta be stars out of the second round. It happens. It certainly happens. Aleem McNeil was a star right out of the third round. So we know Brett Holmes can identify that talent. Why not give him a number of draft picks in order to get it done? Now, as far as uses for the 28th overall pick, I do think there are some better ones than not. I think the best option still is to trade for a star player. As we talked about, that Super Bowl window is shutting. It's not closed. It's not closing in the next year or two. But after 2026, St. Brown gets really expensive. Penei Sewell gets really expensive. Jared Goff gets really expensive. Aiden Hutchinson needs a new contract. Kirby Joseph needs a new contract. Brian Branch, Sam Laporta, Jack Campbell, Jahmyr Gibbs, Alex Anzalone, Khalif Raymond, Jake Bates. All of those guys need a new contract right after the 2026 season. All of them will get a new contract and will be really expensive for whatever team they land on. And the harsh reality of being a great football team is you're not going to retain all of them. Some of those guys are going to go elsewhere. Some of those guys won't be Detroit Lions for life. And while that absolutely sucks, unfortunately, that's just kind of the reality that we live with. I think the second best option is just to stick and pick, right? Brad Holmes has proven that whatever draft pick you give him, he's going to find a really good player. He's going to find a Brian Branch. He's going to find a Sam Laporta. He's going to find a Amon-Ra St. Brown. He's going to find a Derek Barnes, a Kirby Joseph, a Aleem McNeil. He's going to find good quality players. And he did that last year, right? I know a lot of people think that last year's draft was a bit of a downside for Brad Holmes, but he still found a starting cornerback in Terrion Arnold, still found a starting cornerback in Ennis Rakestraw, who was going to start in week 3 before the hamstring injury he suffered during warmups. He found a star guard in Christian Mahogany. He found a good pass rusher in Mekhi Wingo in the 6th round. So we know he can find talent. There's not been a draft that Brad Holmes hasn't gotten a good player out of. So why not give him that opportunity at 28 to do it yet again? The same thing kind of applies for trading back in the draft, right? Why not give him as many picks as possible? Why not give him as many opportunities to find those diamonds as we possibly could? Because yeah, there are Broderick Martins and yeah, there are Hendon Hookers, but for every Broderick Martin, there's 2 Brian Branches. For every Hendon Hooker, there's 2 Sam Laportas, right? And that is the track record Brad Holmes has. Why not trust him to do it? I think the worst option by far is trading up into the top 10. I know we really want Mason Graham. I know everybody really wants Abdul Carter. Everybody wants Mikael Williams or, any of the other pass rushers or any of the other big name players. It honestly doesn't make sense. I think the hit rate in the top 10 is not significantly different from any hit rate in the other rest of the first round or even in the second round for that matter. The NFL draft is not a guarantee. It is the riskiest thing a team can do. And the best way to go from a really good team to a really bad team is to give away all your draft picks and not have anything to show for it, right? That's where the Lions could potentially be if they miss on that top 10 pick. I would much rather trust Brad Holmes to take 2, 3, 4 shots at it than a singular one he has to hit. And I think that that would personally be a really poor option. Now, the Detroit Lions have quite a bit of draft capital as of right now. They have the 28th pick, the 60th, 101, 133, 198, 230, and 246. They have 7 draft picks in this class, 2 of which are in the top 100, 3 of which are in the top 101. 3 picks in the first 2 days. They have essentially a full loaded draft class, right? They're going to walk away with a lot of players. And while these won't be the exact picks that the Lions make, they will have the opportunity to move some assets around and to get a lot of quality players. Going into next offseason, the Lions have a lot of good talent, right? They may not have everybody returning. They may not have every single player that they want yet, but there's still a lot of talent. You look at the edge rushing group, you have Aiden Hutchinson, Aleem McNeil, DJ Reader, Josh Pascal, and Zadarius Smith all still on the roster, with Mekhi Wingo being a rotational pass rusher at that. While that defensive line isn't fantastic and it needs some free agency touch-ups, it needs some draft touch-ups, it's not a bad defensive line to start with. You look at the linebacking core, the guys under contract next year, Alex Anzalone, Malcolm Rodriguez, Jack Campbell, you have Jalen Reeves-Maybin, Derek Barnes isn't under contract, but very well could come back, as is Trevor Nowaske. So you have good quality players there. In the secondary, Terrion Arnold, Amik Robertson, Ennis Rakestraw, Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, really almost the entire starting secondary, with the exception of Carlton Davis, is returning next year. So the Lions are at a great starting point. The Detroit Lions have 7 picks to add to it and an entire cycle in free agency. So I ask you, at the end of the day, what do you want the Lions to do with the 28th overall pick? Do you want them to trade it away for a star? Do you want to stick and pick? Do you want to trade back for as many opportunities as possible? Do you want to trade up for a star player or a star prospect? There are lots of opportunities and lots of options. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on it. But with all of that being said, that is all I got for you guys right now. Let me know down in the comments below your opinions on what the Lions should do. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.